All right, everybody. It looks like we're right at the top of the hour. I appreciate you guys taking time to join us here today. My name is Tom Woods with a company called RII Sports Technology. We're located out here in Colorado, just south of Denver. It's actually where home is to us. So before we get rolling here for a second, I just want to kind of start with a couple things, just kind of set a lay of the land of who we are, where we're coming from, and then give you a quick idea of what we're going to get into, and then we'll dive right into it. Just a quick thing is in terms of admin stuff for the meeting. It looks like everybody's muted out there, which is great. Just don't mind, if you don't mind, stay on mute while we're going through things. Just because sometimes we'll get like a hot mic or something like that that kind of sends reverberations through the system. So if you have a question, by all means, feel free to unmute, chime up, or use the chat function. And if we get questions and things, we can address when we get towards the end. But feel free just to come in and out of mute if you need to share a comment or ask a question is great. Again, just getting started here, a couple of things. Number one, I always like to tell guys before we get going too far what I am and what I'm not. I am not a football coach. I have never been a football coach, and I don't believe I'll ever be a football coach at this point, right? So what I am is a data guy. So my roots are in aerospace and defense. For the last 25 plus years, worked with companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, NASA, places like that, doing a lot of stuff data related for those folks. And then we've also done a lot of work in the financial world, Wall Street kind of stuff, and a lot of stuff in the sports market. So we're data people, and we kind of specialize in finding patterns in data and helping people understand what's going on in data. We started working with football teams about 8-9 years ago, and have seen a good number of things. But keep in mind, I'm not a football coach. So the things I'm going to share with you today are going to come from a data guy's perspective. And there may be some things you'll say, okay, I'll throw that one out, and that one makes sense. So I always defer to you guys and the challenge of actually implementing things with young people to make, try and win a football game. So I know it's one thing for a data guy to say, hey, here's good ideas with data. It's another thing for you as a coach to actually make that happen on the field. So I respect that. And just know we come from that perspective. Secondly, we are RII Sports Technology. That's a company that is a good American for-profit business, right? But this is not a but this session is not a veiled sales pitch. Okay, we're going to spend the next half hour talking about data principles and how they can help you be better with the things you're doing as a football coach. All right, so this is not some backdoor trying to sell them something. You will, at the very end, you'll see some of the things that we do. If you want to stick around and see more, you can, but you certainly don't have to. Okay. So that said, let's kind of get started. And what we're going to do here, let me share my screen to kind of get us moving here. If I can. We'll bring up this. We're not going to slide you to death, nothing like that at all. We've got kind of one set of notes we're going to build as we go through this thing. But this first session we call Breaking Down Film with a Purpose. So if you guys signed up for this, which is again, really appreciate you guys taking time to do that. You probably saw that we have other sessions planned for March and April, where we'll get into some other. We kind of deep dive into a couple topics we're going to bring up today in those sessions. But today is really all about challenging football coaches to think for a second about what you're doing when you're breaking down film, because I think a lot of times we get on. Well, I know I do in my own life, even though I'm not a football coach, we get on autopilot pretty quick. And we do things because that's what we always have done. And we just do it, right? So we're football coaches, and the next generation comes up and everybody does film. So we look at film, we break down film, we do it, but sometimes we don't stop and really think, what are we trying to achieve with it? Because we see in the work we've done with football teams, 3 really distinct purposes for film data. And the things that we believe that if you set your data up right, you should be able to do it. I mean, you should be able to do some very powerful things with your data if it's set up right. So we're going to start by looking at what those 3 main purposes are, and then we're going to look at what you got to do with data to make that happen. Okay, so the first one that we see is a diagnostic purpose for your film data. So as you're breaking down film and putting all this stuff together, you should be thinking diagnostically to some extent. In other words, your film data should help you very quickly be able to tell what is and isn't working, what's broken, what's not broken, but not just that, but also how do I fix it? Okay, too often we persist in errors throughout the course of the season, or we keep pounding away on something that just isn't working, but we don't have awareness it's not working. We keep wondering why we're not having the success we think we should be having. So As you're breaking down film, think, okay, this thing has to help me be a diagnostic tool. All right. And we're going to talk some of the specifics of what you got to do to help that happen. But clearly there should be a diagnostic purpose to what you're doing. Like a doctor looking at an x-ray, we should be able to tell, boom, there's where the break is. Here's how we fix it. Second one. Now, the second one is a predictive purpose. And I think if we, if I talk to, 100 football coaches and asked them, hey, why do you guys break down film? The overwhelming, probably 80+% of those answers would be, well, I'm breaking down film so I can see what that guy's going to do to me. I'm looking for a tendency in my opponent. I'm looking to be able to predict what he's going to do in a situation so that I can anticipate and head him off at the pass and be there before he shows up. That's going to help me win the football game. And I get all that. It's a great purpose. It's the right purpose. But what happens, I think, a lot of times is that most football coaches tend to gravitate to that, and that becomes the only purpose. And when that becomes the only purpose, a couple of these other things that we think should be happening suddenly aren't happening, and you're not getting as much out of your data as possible. And believe me, the predictive thing to me is, it's hugely powerful. In fact, that's, for me professionally as a company, that's our wheelhouse. That's what we do. We predict things in data. We look for patterns. We try and anticipate, predict. We do that with financial markets, aerospace, you name it. So it's right up my alley, but it's not the only purpose. And for you guys as football coaches, it's as powerful, and it's very powerful. Don't get me wrong, but it's also, there's only a few times a game when you can really effectively do it, given the speed and the nature of the game and all those kind of things. So as powerful as it is, it's not something that's going to happen necessarily on every single play. You being diagnostically healthy will affect every single play, but being able to predict something isn't the only game for film data, is my point. Now, the third purpose that we see, and this is the one that I would say from our experience is the biggest missed opportunity by far, is that your film data and the way you set it up, it should allow you to implement a plan that puts you in the best possible play calling positions in any situation during the game. It literally, your film data, if you set it up right, and we're going to show you how you can do that. And more specifically, our sessions that we do in April, we really get heavy into this with showing you guys how to set your data up to do this. But your film data should literally tell you, hey, in this situation, here is a good call and here is a bad call. It should be that clear, that literal to you. Okay. So we're going to look at what it takes to do that. So these three big purposes are the things we think you guys should be getting out of your data, and again, it very much influences how you set that up, which we're going to get into now. But think diagnostically, I should be able to tell what's broken and how to fix it. Predictively, I should have a pretty good idea what that guy's going to do to me. And from an implementation standpoint, I should know if I'm playing a game on Saturday or Sunday, I should know on Monday or Tuesday already what good and bad play calls look like in a situation. I shouldn't find that out during the game. I can know it days and days before. Okay. So those are the three big things that should be happening with film data. Now, to make that happen, the data guy in me is going to kick in here a little bit because we're going to talk data mechanics here for a minute. There's some principles of how you set data up that need to be in place to allow you to do those three things. And really what we're looking at in a nutshell, what we're trying to do from a data standpoint is find patterns in data. Okay, there's two big things we're trying to get done. Identify a pattern, a meaningful pattern that lets us understand things and lets us predict things. So we're looking for patterns, that's one. And the second thing we're trying to do, and that we'll need to be able to do, is we need to be able to take data from one source and data from another source and put them together, okay? So it's the ability to click things together and find patterns. That, from a data concept, is what we're trying to do. Now, so for those things to happen, there are three big principles that you have to think about in your data. I'm going to step through them real quick, and then we're going to dive out of this, and we're going to bring up some actual film data in a file, and we'll look at specific examples of what we're talking about, okay? The first big principle that you got to think about is you need to adopt a universal program-wide data language, all right? And it doesn't matter what the language is, it just has to be consistent in all places. Okay, so and we see this a lot now. I imagine we have teams at all different levels here. We may have some major college teams out there. There might be a high school guy out here right now. It's across the whole. Some of the guys at the FBS level and the NFL level, those guys, they have the advantage of some very detailed, commercially available data sources to them. Things like Pro Football Focus and things like that. where data is already very clean and very much put together and very consistent. But for some that are at, maybe even at the D1 level or down to high school levels where you're having to do it yourself, it's really crucial that as you're doing it yourself, you're adopting one lexicon, one way of saying things. You can't have one guy in your staff who calls some formation, doubles with the word spelled out DOUBLES, and another guy calls it DBL. And if they're both breaking down film, suddenly those can't talk together. We can't find a pattern. Things start to break down. So one universal language, doesn't matter what it is, but if you're the owner of the offensive or defensive staff, it's got to be yours, and you got to mandate that be used correctly at all times. Okay, that's the first thing. We'll look at that in a second about how important that is. Second big one, is you should break down your data in layers. You should go from top to bottom, from generic to specific. Too often we'll see guys, they'll go from, they'll record something like run or pass, and then they'll put a very specific play call in there next to it. Run or pass and XXY banana is the play call, right? So when you do that, the problem is they jump to being too specific too fast, and they skip the layers in the middle. They don't put groupings or levels above that allow us to see things. Now, why is that so important? It's hugely important in so many ways. We always tell guys, as you're preparing through the course of the week, you should be planning conceptually and implementing specifically. So you should be thinking, as you form that plan up on a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, getting ready for a game that's coming up, you need to be thinking about, can I get my concepts right in a given situation? If I'm an offensive or defensive coordinator, I need to be thinking about, okay, in this situation, what's the right concept to be in? I'll fill in the specifics later. You might have a concept like cover 3 as a cover concept for you. And you might have like 5 or 6 or 7 very specific, unique cover 3 coverages you like. The thing is, don't jump to those. You want to you want to be able to see in your data just the concept. Because if I get the concept right, I can go fill in the specifics later. But if you skip that, sometimes they go straight to being too specific. Now, certainly if you guys have, I'm sure you guys have done enough with data that the thought of sample size has crossed your mind, right? It's important. We're trying to find a pattern in data, but we need to have a significant enough amount of data for it to be meaningful, right? So if we see something out there where it's only happened 3 times, and it's 2 out of 3 times the team has done this, we have to challenge ourselves and say, well, is 3 times enough to really surmise something from that? Or is that too small of a sample size? When you group things together, we'll show you here in a minute, that is a way of increasing sample size without needing to break down more data. You don't have to break down more games. Just if you group things appropriately, suddenly you have sample size at a conceptual level that you'd never have at a specific level, okay? You also get the added benefit of the fact that you can move a lot faster at higher levels breaking down film than when you're being too specific, all right? So we'll look at all that in a second, but it's crucial in terms of finding patterns in data that you do it in a layered approach. Generic, less generic, down to specific. But don't just go one, boom, straight to specific. Okay. Third one. This is the mantra that we preach to coaches all the time. It's probably the one that is one of the biggest missed things that we see in data, is the mantra that says, if you control it, include it. If it's in your control, it has to be in your breakdown. All right. Now, what we mean by that is this. Let's say I'm a defensive coordinator, right? And I'm looking at an opposing offense. The thing we see is the tendency is that most coaches tend to gravitate towards being predictive, right? So the first thing they do, and sometimes the only thing they do, is they start putting in, what was that offense doing? Here's the personnel grouping, here's the formation, here's the play, here's the direction. And they put all the stuff in there that has predictive value. The only problem is they don't control any of that. They don't control any of it. They don't control what formation he's going to be in. They don't control what motion he's going to show. They have no control over that. The thing a defensive coordinator controls is his defensive call. Front, coverage, stunt, blitz, that's the kind of stuff he controls. It's far more important, this again, data guy, take this or throw this out. Okay, but the data guy's perspective is it'd be far more important that you put in the things you control first before you worried about all the stuff that was predictive. Because if I am breaking down an opposing offense and I can put in there things like fronts, coverages, stunts, and blitzes, things I control, now my data lets me see what this guy does or doesn't like. And that I can control. So if I can see something in data that says this guy hates it when a team is in cover 3 in this situation, let's say, right? If I can see that in data, that's awesome because I control that. And I can make sure that when that situation comes up, I feed him cover three. I feed him the things he hates. But I don't know that if I don't include that. And that's probably far more effective than just trying to correctly anticipate what's coming those few times a game you can. You're far better off knowing, hey, globally in these situations, here's what he does and doesn't like. And here's what I'm good at or bad at. Serve that up to him. All right, let me jump out of this. Let's bring up some film data here. I'll kind of explain to you in a little more detail what we're talking about. So this is an Excel file with a dump of film data. Okay. When we work with the guys we work with, this is typical stuff that we would see coming from them. Doesn't matter what film system it is. It could be Huddle. It could be DV Sport. It could be Exos. It doesn't matter. It's just they have raw data. They've broken down. They dump it. They send it to us. So this is an example. This is a team. This is a team in the MAC, I believe. It's a D1 team in the MAC. But I'll be honest with you. We get some data from high school programs that easily rival what college guys do. It's not always. You'd be surprised. There's some high school teams I'm like, wow, they must not be teaching any kids over there because they have this great film data. But in this case, this is a defensive staff looking at an opposing offense in this case. And so they have a lot of things in here about this offense, but you'll see I just highlighted a couple just to illustrate the point. They have a field in here called backfield, a field in here called play family, basically. So you can see their language in here. This is addressing the issue of a common language. You'll see things like BG, AG. They're using a certain terminology here to define backfields, certain terminology to define play types, inside zone, power, 60, 70, different types of play concepts. Okay, so they have that. That's their opponent scout data. Now, this next tab, this is their same team self-scout data. So this is now a defensive self-scout. Now, the thing that's telling here that I want to highlight is, boom, here's these same fields, BG, AG, same language. Inside zone, 70, 60, screen, power, same language. So here's a team with two different data sets, but they have common fields and common language. The power of this for them is that because things are common like that, they're able to take their opponent scout data and their self-scout data, and because they're common, they can overlay them, they can connect them. And when you connect them, this gets into what we'll get into in far more detail here in April. But because you can click those two things together, that's going to allow them to see good and bad play calls. They'll be able to tell, hey, here's what I'm good at. Here's what he's not good at. I can line these things up. Being able to do that cannot happen unless there's commonality in fields and language between different data sets. Okay, so this is the importance of adopt a single language, use it everywhere. Let's get into the layers issue for a minute because this is a big one. I believe this is an FCS program we work with. Now they're breaking down information on a team. And this is probably like a lot of you guys do because we see this all the time in data. They have here's formations where they're breaking down formations. They have a lot of different formations in here. You can see things like doubles Y flex, trips Y off, doubles Y flex 1W. They have all these specific formations in here, which is good. It's not bad to be specific. The only thing we would say is it's problematic if you're specific at the expense of also having layers in your data. That would be problematic. But being specific is not bad. It's great if you can do it. We just know that it takes time and effort and resources are hard. But the challenge with this, as an example, if we go to these formations, great detail in here. But if I go pick any one of them, let's say, so let's come down here and say, let's look at, let me pick one of these. Here's Trey Y, here's Trey U flex. Okay, I'll pick Trey U flex. So here I pick Trey U flex. The problem is it's in my data set one time. So it's very specific, but because it's so specific, it doesn't show up enough. So we always say specificity is the enemy of sample size, because the more specific you get, the smaller your sample size gets really quickly. So it feels good. There's this notion, I think, out there, we feel like the more specific we are and detailed we are, the smarter we are. It's not that necessarily not, but you miss something. You're less able to pick up patterns when you're more specific. So to these guys' credit, one of the things we worked with them on is saying, hey, you should have a different level above that. A lot of you guys do this already. They have a separate field called formation family where they can group things at a higher level. So yes, there's specifics, but there's also a higher level. So if I look at like that tray was a 3x1. If I look at the 3x1 category, suddenly I've got 176 plays that are 3x1 plays. I can find a whole lot of meaningful patterns at the 3x1 level that I can't find at the specific level. So if you skip that intermediate level, suddenly you're breaking down. You got great detailed information, but you're not going to find any patterns because nothing happens often enough. So it's the ability to group data and move down through it. It gives you the added benefit, like I said, of being able to move faster. Because again, data guy me talking, so alert on that. But if I had very limited resources, and I was going to break down film, but I just did not have much time, I would sacrifice detail in a heartbeat to give me 4 or 5 good generic data fields in there. Just give me 3x1, 2x2. I don't think I'm going to worry about the specifics because I'll find a lot of patterns at that level, and I can move a heck of a lot faster breaking down film. Just looking, saying 3x1, 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 2x2, instead of trying to say, was that tray or trips or was that Y off or X off? Too hard, takes too long. So you can go much faster. One more thing on the layering thing. Let's look at this one too for a second. You can see here they have different play calls that they're trying to identify against this team. You'll see things in here like cut weak read, stretch strong read. So they're trying to keep it conceptual, and they're doing some good things there. But the problem is here, they're trying to combine too many things into one field. They've got a concept like stretch, and they've got a direction like weak or strong. And when they do that, because you're adding too many things into one field, again, your sample size starts to shrink. They'd be far better off, and we kind of start to show it here, if they added 2 other fields in here, one called concept and one called direction, where they just put stretch or cut and strong or weak in these different fields. If they did it that way, they'd find a bunch of patterns conceptually and a bunch of patterns directionally that they won't find when it's combined into one, okay? So top to bottom, generic to specific, think in layers. That's where sample size grows and patterns start to show up that otherwise get missed. Third principle we talked about real quick was the whole concept of if you control it, include it. So here's an example. This is a high school team. Real good high school team out in Alabama, right? Defensive coordinator does the classic stuff, looking at the opposing offense and putting in the typical things you guys would think. He's thinking predictively, which is, again, not a bad thing, but just the only point is it's just not the only thing. So he's looking predictively here, and he's got personnel, formation, backfield, play, direction, all that kind of, he's got good stuff in there predictably. But what he started to do, to his credit, is he started to recognize the fact that, okay, I don't control any of that. The things I do control are over here. I control the front, the blitz, the coverage. Now, and you'll see what he's done in here. Keep it simple. Don't have to get specific or exotic. You want to keep it at a high level because you're trying to interpret somebody else, not yourself. But he's just got things in here like even, under, bare, just generic categories of types of fronts that defense was in. He's got yes or no on whether they were blitzing or not. Just something as simple as that. Just blitz, yes or no. And coverage, I started to fill these in for him, but these would be, he'd need to add these things. Just a simple, even just the shell or just 2, 3, 1, just something quick and easy. But by doing that now, he's got something where his data can tell him, hey, in this situation, these guys cannot run against even fronts. Great. Then in that situation, I'm going to make sure I'm in an even front because I know he won't be able to handle it, okay? If I'm an offensive coordinator looking at opposing defense, here's typical defensive stuff, fronts and coverages and blitzes. But this OC now has put in concepts, run concepts and pass concepts. Not his specific play calls, just concepts. Because now he can tell, hey, this defense, it's like, hey, you may not be able to predict what coverage he's going to be in or anything like that. But you could look situationally and say, hey, in this situation, these types of pass concepts he has struggled against. Great. Then I'm going to serve those up to him in that situation because I know he doesn't like it. Okay. But you'll never know that. And that'll revolutionize how good you are as a play caller. But you're not going to see that if you don't have it set up this way where the things you control are in your breakdowns. All right. Okay. Let me step back over here real quick. We're down to our last 5 minutes or so. I want to show you the last couple things. So again, just to kind of recap, 3 big purposes: diagnostic purpose, predictive purpose, and the ability to show you good and bad play calls. You should be able to do that with your film data. Okay. To do that, to make that happen, you got to have a universal language you apply everywhere. You want to break data down in layers. And if you control it, you want to include it. Those 3 big things. Now, I mentioned to you, the March session, we get into more detail about the predictive side of things. In the April session, we're going to get into details about this optimized play calling stuff we'll show you. But just a couple quick words on the diagnostic piece as we wrap today. When we talk diagnostics, guys, 3 big things. The first one here kind of goes back to this whole concept of breaking things down in layers. But we always encourage guys, offensive, defensive guys, treat your offense or defense like a system. You want to be able in your data to see where failure mechanisms are happening, why something is or isn't breaking. So it gets back to this concept of saying, I'm an offensive guy. I have a personnel set. And then from that personnel, I run these types of formation families. And then here's specific formations. And here's kind of plays I run from there. Just decompose it like a system. Because when you do, this is my engineering background kicking in. Because then when something's not going right with your data, it's easier to hone in on saying, okay, it's only happening from this formation. Okay, great. Then I can isolate the problem that way if I break my data down like it's a system. Okay. Second big thing, and I know this oftentimes makes coaches bristle a little bit because I know you already feel like you don't have enough time or resources to make it happen. But we harp on the fact you should self-scout every week. And why we say that? A couple of reasons. Number one, again, we tend to think from a film data standpoint, we tend to think predictively all the time. We're always thinking predictively, which is powerful, but you're far better off making sure you're taking care of your own home and that your own ducks are in a row and your own ship is sailing well and putting out the best team you can put out in the field. But you have to know what is and isn't working. And you can't just figure that out on a bye week once and at the end of the season, because most likely nothing's going to happen. So errors persist throughout the season that don't need to be happening because we lack awareness as to what is and isn't working and the ability to carve something out and just focus on what is and get the best of our performance out there on the field. Now, I know it's challenging because we have limited time. That's why we come back to the things like layers and thinking conceptually. Even if you just had a top level conceptual self-scout, just play concepts and simple things like that you can move quickly through, you can keep up, and you're going to be a better team if you can see it. Last thing, we'll leave you with this in the last few minutes. I'll start into something. We'll kind of get you rolling with something, then we'll go from there. The old adage that a picture's worth 1,000 words. Here's the challenge. Even you can do everything right with your data and all the stuff we're talking about here can be present, which is great. It's still challenging, though, sometimes to put the story together and see everything. I mean, if you're still taking data from Excel and dumping out a huddle and trying to cross-reference this report with this report, there still feels like a whole lot of forensic science you got to do with your data sometimes to really get the right story out. The thing is, there are tools out there, some within some of the film systems are starting to do a better job of this, but there are also some other software applications external to that allow you to tap into data and to make a picture of it, to see it. Just like a doctor would hold up, like I mentioned before, an MRI or an X-ray and immediately look at an image and say, boom, there it is. There are ways to do that with your film data. So I'm going to show you one. We use a tool called Tableau software to do this. Let me start. I'm going to show up. I'll bring up a defense. Defensive guys don't get enough credit sometimes. I'll give the defensive guys some love. Let's look at a defensive self-scout for a minute. This is an example. So this is a tool called Tableau. Tableau is not a football software. It's not. Tableau is a data software. What it does is it allows you to tap into data and basically turn it into a picture that shows you things. So real quick on this, let me give you a quick idea. What I'll do is I'm going to introduce it, and then we'll wrap up because I know we'll hit the bottom of the hour. And then I'll probably keep rolling with it for a few minutes for anybody that want to stick around and see more of this thing. But the way this works, you see, this is Nevada's defense from 2019 in a visual format, okay? So take here's their fronts in here. The way you interpret this in a section, the bigger the box means that's what they did most often. So in this case, the stack box is the biggest box in here. That means that they were in their stack front more often than anything else, okay? Color tells you how good an offense performed against them. So if an offense was performing very poorly, it's going to be red. If they were performing very good, it's going to be blue. And it's like a gradual scale between there. Blue's better than green, green's better than yellow. So you can start to visually see something. This is Nevada's entire defense in 2019. So I can visually just immediately say that they were in stack a lot and they were pretty good in stack because it's kind of this orangish color here. They were in Steeler the second most often, but they weren't very good from Steeler. Steeler offenses were better against Steeler than stack. Okay, I can start to see that real quickly. And I can also navigate this very quickly if I wanted to. So I could come to them and say, show me their defense in the red zone. I can slide this field position bar over here, make it the 80-yard line, which means the 20-yard line coming in for us. So I can slice off half the field, say, here's my defense in the red zone. Let me see my run defense in the red zone. I'm going to click down here on run pass where it says run. And here's every running play against me in the red zone last year. I was in Steeler more than I was in stack, but stack was still better, right? Here was my best coverage. If you look down here were different sets that offenses used against me. I was pretty good against everything except when offenses were in a 2-by-1 set. Oof, they were really good against me. He could probe down into that a little bit more and say, okay, here I am, every running play from 2-by-1 in the red zone. And look, it almost didn't matter what I did. They were working me over it. Now, so I say that only, I'm not trying to get lost in Nevada's defense right now, but just to say that there are tools like this that allow you to say, okay, I got my data set up right, but now how can I, in effect, turn it into an MRI where I can very quickly go boom, 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 and I can diagnose with greater speed and efficiency, and I can start to tell, here's where we're broken, here's where we're not, here's what we need to practice and fix, okay? Now, we're at the bottom of the hour. I'm strict with myself about time, so let me just wrap here for a second. What we'll do, again, thank you guys for taking time. What we'll do when we're done here, we'll send you, we'll send you this note sheet. So you've got the notes from the session. What I'm going to do here in a second, if you guys have to drop off, totally get it. By all means, thank you for your time. But again, we'll follow up with this. In the email we'll send you, if you have some film data that you want to send to us, we're happy to put it in one of those visuals I just told you, or take a quick look at it and say, hey, we'd recommend adding maybe this concept level or something like that, and kick it back to you. So that'll be in the email to you. So feel free to send us some data and we'll send this stuff back to you free of charge, just for you to play around with, see if we can give you something you can study with and learn with as you go throughout the off season. But with that, so if you got to go, by all means do. Otherwise, I'm going to step back to the dashboard. I got an offensive one that shows information about we got the Baltimore Ravens offense. We'll look at for a minute if you want to. I'll do that. Feel free now, since we're kind of the formal side of this is done, feel free to drop off of your mute. And if you have questions, interject. If you want to hit the chat, whatever. I'll probably take the next 5-10 minutes. I'll just kind of spew through a dashboard if you want to stick around and take a look. But again, now feel free, just interrupt as you will. If you have questions and things you want to talk about. So let me step back over here. Again, this was the defensive side of things for Nevada. And before I leave this one, I'll set a couple things back here. I'll just show you there's so many different ways that you can diagnose yourself, so to speak, with a tool like this, because, we looked very situationally here for a second. We went into the red zone and said, let's look at all their run defense in the red zone. But if I set everything back where it was, let's say, I could also look at it from a completely different perspective, right? So I could come in here. Here are different types of play families they have down here, right? So here's zone running game, stretch running game, 3-step passes, power, all that kind of stuff. I could look at one of these. Like, here's their stretch. So their stretch defense, not great. I say that only because it's green. It's 55% of the plays were good against them. They're giving up 6 yards of play on stretch plays, right? So if I'm the defensive coordinator looking at that, that's a problem for me. I want to diagnose that. I could just look at a play concept. And when this updates here in a second, I can then look at myself defensively and say, okay, we weren't great against stretch. That is true. But we really were bad against it from Steeler. I could start to say stack still wasn't great, but it was only 4.7 yards when we're in stack. We're 8.2 yards of play when we're in Steeler. The ability to see that quickly is what's powerful about a tool like this. Because now, as I go out to the practice field, I can be thinking that in my head. It's like, my God, we cannot stop stretch from Steeler. Why not? And gives me something to address and figure out how to fix and make it work. You look at your backfields at the same thing. This is stretch play, right? So here, look at these different back sets that they've run stretch plays against. And I can see that when teams have tried to run it from pistol, I've been good. But when they've tried to run it from the gun, strong or weak gun, any kind of gun as opposed to pistol, I'm getting worked. But I'm good from pistol. So it's another clue as to, okay, what is going on here? And specifically, weak gun, really bad. But it's the ability to see it. Now, not to get lost again in Nevada's defense. What's key is setting your data up right. And these guys have set things up. They have layers. They have some specificity where it makes sense. They got a good language. Now it's about, okay, now they got a tool that says, now I can see it. I can see it. I can move faster. It is this MRI for me. Let me show you the Ravens. This goes back. This is a couple seasons ago. This isn't the most recent season. I think this goes back a couple seasons. And now a team like the Ravens is a team they're an NFL team, right? So the data we're using here is Pro Football Focus data, which is something they have readily available. A lot, most D1 FBS programs have Pro Football Focus data available. the thing that's great about something like that, you don't have to have it. You can use your own data for this, is that by its nature, because it's a commercially available data tool, the data structure is really clean. And all the principles we've talked about, like layers and language, are all kind of inherently in it, which make it great. So there are tons and tons of fields that the Ravens could look at. But here's the Ravens offensively. Let's dive into the Ravens. Let's look at the Ravens run game for a second. Let's just look at them running, and they're a good running football team. So I'm going to go into the Ravens run game, and we'll look at different concepts. Let's look at the different. This is a Pro Football Focus field called Run Concept Primary. So the primary running concept. So we can see things like power, man, counter, inside zone, outside zone. So look, I made a great 68% efficiency. Now, real quick, when we say efficiency, this is a quick word on that. We kind of by default use one that says, hey, on first down, if you get 4 yards or more, it's a good play. Less than 4 is not. Second down, if you get more than half of what's to go, it's good. Less than half is not. Third or fourth down, if you convert, it's good. Otherwise, it's not. So basically, based on down distance, all that kind of stuff, you can quickly tell whether a play is any good or not. And then we just average them, say what percentage of those plays were good. So when we say inside zone here, 68% efficient means, man, they're great running inside zone, but they're not running outside zone. Only 3.6 yards of play and 45% efficient running outside zone. They're a great running team, but they're one hole. And that can be the thing. You can be a really good team at something. They're really good at running the football, but it doesn't mean they're perfect. And it means that there still are holes and weaknesses. So for them, outside zone's a weakness. So we could probe into that a little bit and go deeper. And let's look at their outside zone running game. Okay, so here they are specifically, and suddenly things don't start to look as good. Here's their personnel. Look at personnel down here, 21, 11, 22, 20. And you can see right in here that they're actually really pretty good running outside zone when they're in 21 personnel or 22. So it's like when they have, 2 backs, basically, and at least 1 tight end. But here, 11 personnel and 20 personnel, just not working, and specifically 20 personnel, terrible, right? They can start to see that pretty quickly. There's a field over here. Well, we'll bring this up. It's kind of hidden behind my window. Maybe you're seeing it already, but I'll add it over here just real quick. This is the ball carrier. So we're looking at outside zone running plays for the Ravens here. Here's their different ball carriers. Now, this goes, I don't know, these are numbers. I don't remember who these people were. We could probably look them up, but I don't remember exactly. So when they ran outside zone, their best outside zone runner was number 33 that year. He was about 50% efficient, but number 28, 34, these other guys down in here, I'm trying to think who these were. I don't know, probably Gus Edwards or something. I don't know who these guys are, but they can see pretty quickly who, if they're trying to run outside zone, their most effective outside zone runner is number 33, with the exception of number 8 down here, who's Lamar Jackson, who ran it twice. Okay. But so they can very easily see that. You could go another route. If I click back off of outside zone, I'm looking at ball carriers here. I could look at all my ball carriers and say, okay, let's look at number 28. If I go look at number 28, it'll start to tell me what he's best at and what he's not best at. So here's number 28. Not good from outside zone, but fantastic running inside zone. 28 running inside zone is great, but trying to get him outside, not happening. Number 33, same kind of thing. This where the data guy, and they can get lost in these things pretty quick. Number 33 can't run power, fantastic running inside zone, right? So again, the principle is this: it's that your data gets structured in a certain way, and the point is there are tools that allow you to make it very interactive and very visual, and make it, like we talked about from a diagnostic standpoint, turn it into an MRI, turn it into an X-ray, that where the data your data wants to scream a story to you. It's just getting it in the format that allows that to actually happen is always the challenge. Okay. So I've chewed up a lot of your time. Again, feel free to ask questions. If you want to check on something, if you want me to click on something, let me know. But again, the offers out there as we're sending this information. If you have film data, it's as simple as just dump it out of your film system to an Excel file and send it over to us. If you do that, we'll throw it into one of these and send this thing back to you. You guys can go study and play around with one of these. Especially now, the month of February for a lot of guys, and at least at the collegiate level, recruiting, you're kind of off the recruiting trail. Spring ball hasn't probably kicked in yet. It's kind of this little window. So it's quiet. There's one, I call it quiet, it's probably not quiet for you, but some reasonably quiet window of time where it's like, okay, what can we learn and study as we prepare? You're going to start going into spring practice. it'd be good to be able to look back at what you did last year and say, boy, we're going to spring practice. We need to be looking at power with number 33, or OTAs or whatever it is. This is the thing that can guide you and show you, hey, here's where it merits our attention. Anyway, listen, thank you guys so much for taking time to be a part of it. We'll also, anybody who's attended these, we'll send you a specific invite to the subsequent ones we have coming up. It'll be about 3-4 weeks out when we'll start doing this again. That'll be focused on the predictive side of things. And then we'll do it again in April, talking about how you can optimize play calls and find strength on weakness and all that kind of stuff. But thanks much. If there's no questions, we'll call it here. If there are, I'll stick around for a second. Feel free to ask away. But thank you so much for taking time.